Hey, what's up YouTube? Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another big video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change your front brake pads and your front brake rotors on a 2014 Mazda 3. Now this is the 2.5 liter engine, and this is also the Japan manufactured version. Some of these are made in Mexico, and I guess the hardware or parts are slightly different. At O'Reilly, where we ended up getting our parts, really the only question they had is it made in Mexico or not? And this one is made in Japan, so hopefully we got everything we need here. But let's get started. Now the first thing I like to do is push the caliper piston back in the caliper in order to make room for the new pads, which are thicker. The easiest way I found to do that is with a flathead screwdriver. Just put it in here and pry that. You can also take this caliper off and then push it in with a C-clamp or the caliper compression tool. But before we do that, we need to pop the hood and take a look at the master cylinder and make sure that there's enough room in that reservoir, because we're going to push this backwards, pushing the fluid back up this line into the master cylinder. As an alternative, you can also just take this rubber cap off here and crack open this little brake bleeder valve and put a hose on there, and then as you push the caliper piston back in, it will push the old fluid out this direction rather than going backwards. It's actually a good way to cycle through your brake fluid if it's getting old. But keep in mind, if you do open up the hydraulic system or allow any air or anything to get in there, you will have to bleed the brakes when you're done. In this case, we're not going to be needing to bleed the brakes since we're not opening the hydraulic system. So let's go take a look, make sure that we've got enough room. All right, so here is our brake master cylinder. This is actually just the reservoir. The cylinder is down there, but you can see pretty clearly here that we do have quite a bit of room still underneath the max line. So we will be able to push that fluid backwards without making a big mess or overflowing that. A lot of people ask me if you need to remove this cap before pushing the caliper piston back in. I guess the concern is there may be too much pressure, or this air inside here is going to compress. Most of the time I'll just leave the cap on. Sometimes I take it off, in order to see inside, but a lot of times I will leave the cap on because brake fluid will absorb moisture, even moisture in the air. It's hygroscopic, and the absorbed moisture will actually cause it to degrade and go bad. So we'll just leave it on this time and push the caliper piston back in. We're ready to go do that now. Now if you look in here, you can see that the screwdriver will just fit right in this opening. And I kind of go this direction, so you try to grab on the edge of the rotor or the pad. And once you have it in there, you just pull on that. And you can see the caliper slide on those slide pins. And that's how easy that is. And see, we've got a lot more room. Now sometimes I'll also shift the screwdriver, and now I can see the pad right there, and just scoot the pad over and fit right in between the pad and the rotor. And we're going to do that one more time. And there, that's all the way pushed back in. Now we've got lots of room in there for the new brake pad. Now we need to loosen and remove these two caliper slide pin bolts, and those are a 13mm. Now I was going to mention, I do have this turned to the right when doing the passenger side. I turn it to the left when doing the driver's side, so that you have a little bit more room to work in here. And that's what those look like. We'll set those aside. I just got a little caliper hook here. You can use a bungee cord or whatever. This is what I used to use, a little piece of rope with some bungee cord ends. But the idea is that you don't really want to let this caliper dangle by the rubber hose. So we're just gonna hang it up over here. And I'm hooking it on the bottom just so it's not binding that hose as I put it up here. Just kind of a nice little curl. And that's out of the way. All right, then we can pop out the old brake pads. Screwdriver works just fine. This one's got a little bit of cracking on it, and it's worn down. I mean, it's not completely worn, but we've got a nice crack going this direction here, so it's a good thing we're changing that. And you notice on the inside pad, we have our little noisemaker here. Now we do have new hardware on this caliper bracket. I'm just gonna pop it off now, but we will be putting new hardware on there. If your brake pads don't come with this new anti-rattle spring, you will need to clean this up and reuse it, although it is recommended to change every time. All right, now to get this caliper bracket off, there's two 17mm bolts over here. And you'll need a good breaker bar, or in this case, I'm just gonna use an impact wrench. This is the high torque Milwaukee with just a little flexible adapter on there and a 17. It's a good idea to keep one hand on this when you're taking out that last bolt so that this doesn't drop on the ground. Now to get this rotor off, a lot of times these get stuck to the hub like this one is. Sometimes they just come right off, and sometimes, you know, you gotta hit it with a big hammer. Now the other method, other than smacking this with a big hammer, because a lot of times a hammer will, you know, it'll get it off, and sometimes you really got to go to town, or you can get a big puller. But most rotors have a little threaded hole right here on the hub, and if you can find a bolt that fits that, I believe this was a metric 8 by 1.25. Just wanted to show you this method today, a little bit different than smacking that with a hammer. And then just tighten the bolt. There it is. We'll take our bolt back out. That's it. Again, you can always go Tanya Harding on that rotor. That works fine too, but just wanted to show you that other method in case you get into a bind and that gets stuck on you. Now we're going to clean this hub with a wire wheel before we put the new rotor on. Just remember to wear some safety glasses if you're going to use something like this. You can also just use a wire brush. You don't need the wire wheel. It's just kind of a fast way to get a lot of that rust off. Now to make sure that the rotor doesn't get stuck in the future, a little bit of anti-seize. We're just going to brush a little bit on that hub and around that face. And a little goes a long way with this stuff. Don't get too carried away. You'll just make a big mess. It gets on everything and sticks to everything. I'm not so worried about getting it all the way to the ends or anything, but just the main center hub seems to be where they usually are stuck. Now before we put the new rotor on, we need to clean off all of the oil and whatnot. It's like packed in like a protectant oil, so you will need to grab some brake cleaner or something like that. I usually just spray it on a little paper towel here and then just wipe that down. That's just from sitting on the ground, picked up a bunch of debris there. Now we're going to get this caliper bracket cleaned up and ready to go back on. Really just need to clean off these little areas here with that hardware rides, and we're just going to hit that with a wire brush. Okay, and then we also need to pull out each of these slide pins. So we're just going to clean these off. A little bit of brake clean helps get those real clean. Just want to inspect, make sure that there's no major wear or pitting. Sometimes I'll put these back in once or twice. I mean, you can just spray those out with brake clean, I guess. And I've tried shoving paper towels in there or whatever, you know, before just to wipe them out, but just a little bit of that old grease isn't really going to hurt. And this is what I'm going to use on the slide pins. This is the synthetic caliper grease by Versachem. It's a nice pretty blue color. You don't want to use just petroleum based grease on these because it will get real sticky and these will bind up and cause your brakes to drag. When we put that in, just press it all the way in. The little rubber boot just kind of pops back up on that shoulder, and then just make sure that there's no trapped air inside. Sometimes you have to squeeze on that boot and just spin it, make sure it's spinning and sliding freely. That looks good. Let's do the other one here. Again, just kind of, I just usually hold one thumb or finger on the rubber boot as I pull it out. And this one does have a little rubber bushing on the end. Helps for, I think, just dampening some vibration and noise as well. Same thing, we'll just try to put that in a few times and get it nice and clean. When these get old, they'll swell, and that will cause these to get stuck. So you just do need to inspect that, make sure that it still moves freely inside that caliper bracket. That feels a lot better than it did. Perfect. Now before we put the new hardware on, I'm going to also brush this little area right here where those little anti-rattle springs or abutment clips go. This is not to lubricate this, it's just to protect it from rust jacking or corrosion. And these are pretty simple, they just clip in. Just make sure those press all the way in. There we go. Same with this one, just kind of line it up. Okay, looking good. Now before I put these bolts in, I am going to put a little bit of the blue medium strength thread locker on here. That's way too much. Perfect. Okay, and it's kind of tricky just to get this up here and lined up. Sometimes it helps to put one lug nut back on the studs there to hold the rotor in place, but we're gonna try it here. Just get that started. That worked. There we go. Just gonna zip those on real quick. Now on the brake pad here, I already kind of put a little bit of brake grease on here, but I usually like to put a little bit on the back of the shim and at the ends here. That just seems to help, makes the pads less noisy. Just make sure you don't get any on the surface of the pad. You just kind of line this up. Yeah, this is gonna be a fun one here. Well, that is one of the toughest ones I've ever done in my entire life. All right, I'm gonna take it back off and do it the other way. Going backwards. All right, so this is too hard. Just kidding. Okay, well, I could not for the life of me get that to go in. So I'm taking this off. I'm gonna try to do it this way. Sometimes it's easier. Okay, almost had it. I was really fighting with these clips here. I put the bracket on and tried it. That didn't work, so I took it back off. And you can see I've got a bunch of grease all over the front of the pad, so I'm gonna clean that off here too. I think that'll work. But yeah, these little springs on this, they're really difficult to get those pads in when it's on. It's still difficult to do with it off here too, but we got it. Let's just see if we can get the other one here as well. Okay, so that's started. It's kind of under those clips, and then just kind of try to push it. There we go. That's kind of almost there. Well, yeah, that is a pain. This one's not all the way in, but let me see if I can put it back on here real quick, and then we'll press it up against the rotor. There it is. All right, well, let me tell you, these clips are definitely a lot harder to work with than most. Just this little tension spring kind of squeezes them in place. I guess keeps them from making too much noise. Let's get these torqued down. So on the caliper bracket bolts, these larger ones, I was able to find the service manual, and that says to torque these from anywhere from 68 to 81 foot-pounds. So I'm just gonna go with 75 foot-pounds, but anywhere between 68 and 81 is what it says in the manual. And then we can pull off our caliper here, take off this little hanger. And before we put it on, it's important to inspect the caliper, make sure that it's pretty clean and that the boot is not torn. I'm also going to put just a little bit of this brake grease on the metal contact points here where it's going to squeeze on the brake pads. Again, the idea there is just to help keep these quiet, and that stuff seems to do the job. And these are 13 millimeter bolts. Let's get those put back in. Just going to zip those on real quick. Again, if these slide pins here spin, you can grab an open end wrench and put it on there. I believe it's a 19 millimeter. And then the torque spec on these, what I found was anywhere between 20 and 22 foot-pounds. So we're gonna go with 22. That's the gear wrench, torque wrench that I'm using, the 85062. And you're done. Now just remember, before you head out, it's important that you step on the brake pedal several times until it feels firm. When you're doing that, just press it down about halfway, not all the way to the floor, or you can damage the seals in your master cylinder. What that's doing is pushing the caliper piston back out, pressing that pad or those pads up against the rotor where they need to be. And just remember to double check the master cylinder fluid level before you head out as well. Make sure that that's all topped off and ready to go. I hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll get a link in the description to some of the parts and tools used in the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.